Hello everyone, today we're looking at Alan Wake 2. This game was an interesting sequel to a game that I thought would never get a sequel, and there are some interesting things about it, but on the whole, is it better than Alan Wake 1? It's more or less on the same level, so let me just kind of go through a few things about the game that I liked and really didn't like. So what's new in this game is you're playing as the other main character, Saga Anderson, who is a FBI investigator. And again, this is even more leaning into the perhaps origin of the series, which is a very Twin Peaks kind of vibe. And so they're called to this small town of Bright Falls to investigate a murder. And the official story of what's happened in the Alan Wake universe was that he essentially disappeared about 13 years ago, and that's officially what happened. And sure enough, he's in the dark place. And Alan Wake in general, I think everyone kind of went through the same experience where this game was suddenly announced. It won a huge thing at the Game Awards. There was a big show, and people were like, oh yeah, that one game that kind of got good-ish reviews back in the day that everyone kind of tried but never really finished. And so all the people who had started that game and never finished it felt very guilty, myself included. I think I actually did beat the game, but I never tried the DLC, and so I thought, okay, well, this is kind of the end of the 360 era, so I went back and I did the DLC sections, and there were actually some interesting mechanics that I actually talked about in that DLC section, like you have words appearing and Alan is manifesting words in the world in order to solve the problems. But the main issue with Alan Wake is how it ends, and how it ends is what it is based on, which is a lot of Stephen King novels. And the issue with Stephen King novels is that there's something really interesting, really weird, really unusual, and it's always a great setup. But if he ever tries to explain or give a reason for why things are happening, it's always something really dumb. And I don't think King books, they ever conclude satisfactorily. They're always just kind of cringe. They're like, it was aliens. Yeah, the whole time it was just something. It was some weird, unexplained thing. It's whenever you try to rationalize the supernatural, it always becomes something underwhelming. And so, because of that, or in spite of that, Alan Wake 1 ends with nothing really being resolved. He's just stuck in the dark place, and that's pretty much the entirety of this game. Is that even despite the introduction of a new character, new arc, new everything, it kind of ends on the exact same tone and place as the first game, which is that they're still just kind of stuck in the dark place. And that's technically fine from a writing perspective, in the sense that as long as the hero's journey returns to the beginning point, you have this sense and feeling that at least the world is better off. There's some boon which has enlightened the world, but that's not really the case here. It just kind of goes back to square one. But anyway, I digress. So the two main gameplay elements that are introduced, so Alan's gameplay is more or less the same, except that the only thing that changes with his environments is that now you have certain scenes and certain ideas and concepts. And it's a really cool mini game where you kind of line up a blue orb and a black orb, and it gives you insight into a previous conversation or an idea he had. And so they might be, like the devil, a murder scene, a cult. And so there's certain rooms in the environment in Alan's levels where you go to the menu and you go into his mind palace or his mind place or whatever. And in there he has a board that he would use to, draft stories and create ideas from. And on this board, he has basically gameplay elements which change the structure of the room. So if he changes it from a normal room to a murder scene, it might open up a pathway or a doorway and affects the world around him. And it's actually a pretty cool mechanic. And so, of course, you need to get more ideas as you go through a specific level and apply those as you get to those specific rooms that you need to sort and find out. And so with Alan's story, what has happened is he has been writing for about 10 years or 13 years to escape the dark place, and he actually does. He finds a way to escape, but with him comes all of this evil stuff from Cauldron Lake. And again, it's just that Cauldron Lake is evil. There's some weird evil energy there for whatever reason that Alan tapped into to write his first story, and now he's trying to basically escape. And so Saga Anderson, as she's investigating this ritual murder by this cult in the woods of Bright Falls, they come across Alan Wake, who comes out of the lake. And so they kind of put him in semi-custody and ask him where he's been, what's going on. And this is where I kind of really didn't fully enjoy this part, where like, for some reason, as I was playing this game, I was immediately comparing it to Silent Hill, because I feel like this is the most similar thing to that type of game. There's also something really weird / interesting that I read on the description of this game, at least on reviews and stuff. It says this is Remedy's first foray into the survival horror genre. I thought, wait a second, wasn't the first game just very much the same thing? And the tone and mechanics are actually slightly different, because the first Alan Wake was kind of more about action adventures. Like, you go through a series of areas and you fight these monsters, and it is, you know, scary or horror-ish, but the whole thing is that he's the guy writing the story, so he's not immersed in it. I mean, he is technically immersed in it, but it's not supposed to actually scare the player, technically, I think. I don't know. I mean, it's, you know, it's whatever. So this one feels like it's more so trying to actually scare the player. It's trying to be an actual horror game to an extent, rather than an action adventure style game, which is interesting. So there's a bit more, you know, horror elements, a bit more kind of gory or uncomfortable aspects to it, but still trying to retain that identity of being a fun adventure, I guess, that you go through. So again, so Alan's story is divided from Saga in the sense that he is trying to he said he's written himself out of the story, but now there is an evil version of him called Scratch. And I first thought, oh, isn't this Zane from the previous game, from the DLC and whatever, who was his doppelganger who wanted to make a film version of his book? And it turns out no, because Zane is also in this game, and he's still the same character, but in this new context, he has another doppelganger, which is literally his shadow self. And so his shadow self is just called Scratch, because he'll scratch out all the edits and rewrite them. And so Scratch's role is that he's still writing the story to make bad things happen. And so there's this whole convoluted story where you have Saga investigating the cult, and she thinks Alan Wake is the cause of this cult, but he's saying he's trying to write the story to reverse the events of the cult, and they're stuck in a metaphysical battle. And this is what I don't like, is the fact that Saga, from a very early point in the game, figures out or accepts that there are magical beings. Like, I really hate this dynamic, because in the first game, it's like you're Alan Wake, you're fighting these demon things in the woods that resemble real people, kind of, but at the same time, you're wondering if your mind is playing tricks on you. This is, again, why I'm thinking of Silent Hill, is that, okay, is this your interpretation, your envisionment? Are we inside your own mind? Are these your unresolved, you know, psychological consequences that are driving all of these monsters and characters towards you? And then you'd have a break where you go back to reality, and suddenly you're talking to the people that you seemingly thought you killed, and they're completely fine and just talking to you about brunch or something. And so having these two worlds of the very simplistic, idealistic, isolated town, and the psychological, tormented world, similar to Deadly Premonition or Silent Hill, was always really compelling to me, because it's like, okay, am I really seeing it through their eyes or another person's eyes? What's going on with Saga? And very early on, after the first cult ritual murder, the victim, you know, ends up getting off the operation or morgue table, comes alive, and she shoots him in this evil shadow form. I thought, oh, cool, this is going to be a point where Saga's like, oh, what, did that really happen? Was that real? Did anyone see that? And it immediately has real-life consequences. And it immediately manifests as, yeah, okay, there's supernatural beings in this world, and I don't get it, but I'm going to trust these manuscript pages that are telling the story of how me and my agent Casey are interacting with the world. Like, she just immediately trusts it. She just immediately goes into it. I was waiting for her to be the Scully character of the series, but she just automatically is like, yeah, okay, supernatural, whatever. And then the other police officers in the morgue, because this happens in the police headquarters morgue, they're like, what happened? And they're like, oh, there's monsters and whatever, and so we have to go back to Cauldron Lake to investigate. And they're just like, okay. So I cannot. I don't know. It's a very bad and kind of weak characterization, I feel, and I just don't really like it. And so that's one issue I have. It's just she just accepts it as whatever. And then with Wake, she just immediately accepts, yeah, okay, so you can rewrite the story. So what the overall story that appears is that Saga has a husband and a daughter, and in one of the versions of the story, the daughter has drowned and is dead and is in another state or whatever. So in the real world, so to speak, her daughter and husband are in another state, and in this one, they actually moved back here and said that basically when they moved back here, because she got divorced and her daughter drowned also in this trailer park. And so she's trying to figure out which one is the real story and the fake story. And I kind of was hoping that they would do this little switcheroo where Alan says, well, obviously Scratch is the one writing the story where your daughter drowned, so we have to work together to rewrite that story and defeat it. And I was kind of waiting for the twist that her daughter already drowned, and so Wake was writing the story where she was actually alive in another state in order to galvanize her to actually do the investigation and help him defeat Scratch, and is actually hiding the harsh truth from her. But that never actually manifests. It's like, okay, Scratch is just writing the version where she's dead and she just has to save him. It's like her. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. So that's where the two kind of narratives branch off. So it's interesting how Saga is in the real world doing all these other things, and Alan is in the dark place in his mind palace, and that's where he is exploring and dealing with things on the other side, I think. And so in Alan's level is kind of all New York based off his previous experiences and his life there. And you shift through different environments and different areas that are part of his book. So as he's writing this story, he sits down to his typewriter, and in his mind, he is basically fighting to rewrite the story and fight Scratch. And then Saga's in Bright Falls, going to different communities and helping out. So here's the other thing of the actual gameplay. So Alan has kind of all of his same powers, the same mechanics. You use light, focus light to reveal the enemy's weaknesses, and then you also use things like the flare gun, the shotgun, all these other things, flashbangs now, and that becomes part of Alan's arsenal that he uses to defeat the Dark Shadows, essentially. And that really isn't anything new or changed. It's just a little bit more HD now. Of course, there's lots of puzzles scattered throughout the levels, how you fix things and solve things, which are pretty decent, I would say. You know, which scene suits the best reality. There's also these hidden collectibles, which I didn't really understand at first, where there are these giant yellow circles that you have to aim at, and they give you words of power, words of stuff, words of strength. And so these are kind of points you can use to upgrade things like your stamina, your health, your map even. There's some pretty cool upgrades that you can get, and I didn't really realize that they were things that the way you're supposed to get them is you just shine your light on them until you get it. And I didn't get that till like a lot later. I was like, oh, whoops, I was supposed to be doing that. But anyway, on Saga's side, when she's in, the wilderness of Bright Falls, she actually has a pretty impressive repertoire of weapons. She has a pistol that you can turn into an automatic. She has a shotgun. And actually, it's funny, by the end of the game, there's two different shotguns. I had no idea this was the case, but she had a sawed-off one and a pump action. And then later on, she gets a crossbow and a rifle. And it's kind of interesting how the meta of that gameplay is, again, really around inventory management. And it's really interesting at first that usually you get a certain amount of bullets or items, and then it kind of caps and makes another stack. And so for most items, like healing items, pills, pads, and first aid kits, they cap at 2. Crossbow bolts cap at 4. But for ammunition like pistol ammo, pistol, shotgun, and rifle ammo, it just keeps going up. Like at one time I had 40 bullets of pistol ammo, and it just would not end. So there's kind of a weird thing there, but like not unwelcome. Obviously it was functional. Another aspect of Saga's story is, of course, she has her own mind palace where she is a detective. So instead of having ideas and themes, it's actually really cool. She has that old school corkboard method. And so as you investigate the crime scenes in the world of Bright Falls, little things will pop up saying, oh, I noticed this thing. And so you have to go to your mind palace and search through these clues you have and attach them to case files or for problems. And so there'll be things like, okay, who's the identity of the cult? What do they want? Who's involved? And so you start profiling certain people, which is actually another thing where you dive into a certain person and there's no real skill involved there. While with the corkboard, you have to match to the thing. With the profiling, you just try to get inside someone's head, and it's a series of cutscenes of her trying to imagine their thought process, and exactly kind of like a Hannibal Lecter kind of way, or the TV show, where they're trying to go through their actual thoughts, and you just get a little cutscene with an overtone. And I really do like how they've done this style of silhouettes, faces faded in and out and superimposed. It's very artistic, and I recall the first time they really did this for me was Control. And that's the other thing too. I was kind of thinking this would be more similar to Control. In terms of the gameplay, it's actually very similar to the original Alan Wake, but in terms of setting, tone, atmosphere, and stylization, I would say it's more similar to Control, where you have people's stream of consciousness invading, the sound effects, the intense synths and bass are very reminiscent of Control. Even when you open up the game, it's like Alan Wake 2. And something I'm also just confused at, it's like a numeral 2, but I also see like a number 2 on a lot of things, and it's like, okay, which one are we going here for, guys? Of course, there are also save spots in this game where, dissimilar from the first Alan Wake, where it's very linear, there's a bunch of zones and areas. And in fact, the whole game is like this for both Saga and Alan, where essentially even though you're going linearly through a level, it eventually hubs back to the main area, which I really like. So it feels like, okay, I remember how it can go that way and open up this route and that route. And the way you navigate to the new locations is pretty interesting. In Alan's world, he'll have this light stand that captures light within it, and so as there's certain street lamps or lamp posts that have an indicator over them, you can basically use that to hold down the A button, and it'll turn on the light or turn off the light, and that'll shift the environment as well as adding new ideas to the board. With Saga, she has to solve these things called overlaps, where the story world and the real world overlap. And so for that, you have to usually do some kind of puzzle and do some kind of ceremony or ritual, like putting a witch's heart through this board, which is a historical depiction of the lake and the countryside. And so you do that little ritual, that little mini game or puzzle rather, and that opens up the next part of the level, or usually the boss room. And so that goes to the next chapter. Again, it's pretty interesting that you switch between Saga and Alan's story via not every save point, but most save points will have a janitor's bucket and a puddle on the floor, and that pool of water, for whatever reason, is the influx between the two different stories. Aside from that, you also have the coffee thermos, which is your main means of saving the game. And you also have a shoebox, which is your inventory management item. It's basically your chest via Resident Evil style, which I found to be pretty interesting. So you have these ordinary items that, of course, have these supernatural powers, very similar to Control, and kind of the mainstay of Remedy in general. Again, in terms of combat, the enemies range from, cultists to not too many different types, honestly. There's wolves. The wolves are really annoying because they're very fast and don't have a lot of health, but you just can't hit them. And you do not have a lot of ammo in this game, so you cannot be spraying up the wilderness and the forest. You have to hit your targets. And again, that kind of ties into inventory management, where even though you can hold 4 crossbow bolts and then it replicates, because it stacks only after 4, you're kind of really encouraged to use the crossbow, because your inventory will just fill up if you're not careful. And so there's an upgrade that makes you shoot 2 bolts at once, and it's just so useful. And of course, you recover, usually more than half the time you can recover your bolt from the enemy, which means you're also flushed with bolts. So you're just using the crossbow a lot, otherwise you're throwing away ammo for your other weapons. Again, there's other really cool things that Saga has later in the game. Of course, there's the classic flare, there's the flashbang, which is new, but also a pocket flare that shoots across and does a whole AoE style damage, which feels really good. And yeah, enemy types are still humanoid. They rush you, attack you with axes, hammers. They throw hammers sometimes. There is one special enemy type, which is like, it's actually a really cool optical illusion, where it looks like someone's submerged in water, but they're walking on land, where their bottom half and their top half are mirrored, and that's kind of the more powerful enemies. And there's also, just big guys with hammers. But aside that, that's all for the enemy variety, but they all look and sound and feel very cool. How fluid they are, how they move across the landscape. It still feels very distinct and unique to the Alan Wake universe, which is really nice. Again, another thing is also hunting for collectibles. There in Saga Story, there are different sort of Easter eggs you find and lunch boxes, which actually Rose left behind, who is another character who ends up leaving behind, these things that you can upgrade your points with, and also cult stashes, which, are things that give you ammo and other things like that. And they are pretty hard to find, honestly, to find all of them. In my normal playthrough, there's definitely quite a few I missed that I just said, I don't know, don't have time for this. There's also weird riddle rhymes with Saga, which are these doll puzzles, and I thought it was like a one-time thing, but there's multiple of them. And essentially what you do is there's a piece of paper with 5 child drawings, and you have to place the dolls in the right order. And whenever you do that, you usually get a charm. And so charms, again, are a completely new thing. They're basically equipable items that you have 3 of them. And depending on what you equip, they do things like give you, again, more health, more ammo. Sometimes they save you from death, that kind of thing. And so that was pretty, interesting and novel. And on Rose's character, I really like Rose. Rose is a very fun character, where it turns out that she's been communicating with Alan via his writing, and he's been sending her secret messages, except he hasn't. Even though Alan has been sending secret messages, Rose is so obsessed with him. She has a cardboard cutout of him in her room in the retirement home, and she's so obsessed with him that she ends up helping him and communicating with them and the allies of the game without realizing they intended it. She's just actually obsessed and crazy, which is honestly really funny to me. But yeah, Rose is a great character, and I really love the scene where Rose first meets Saga and says, "Oh, you've come back here after all this time, after your kid drowned. That's so brave of you." And so I really enjoyed that initial thread and where it was going, that you were going to have these 2 realities, and Saga was kind of going to have to confront her inner self and the guilt of what happened, but they just immediately realize it's a supernatural thing, and she no longer questions it, saying, "Oh, it's just not real. I'm not going to believe it." And it's just, I don't know, it's kind of frustrating that that element of mystery was just kind of explained so early. Similarly, there's a side story about Pat Main, who's on the radio show, and he has this ongoing thing where he says the show is sponsored by Wendy Davis and Davis Jerky, beef jerky, that sells their stuff every Sunday at the market. And throughout the story, again, it turns out that everyone is telling him that she actually died years ago, 13 years ago, in fact, when Alan Wake was, disappeared. And so, again, the way that story went out is that on the second call, the husband calls in and says, Pat, she's really dead. I wish you could stop this prank that you're doing. And Pat is like, no, what are you talking about? I saw Wendy last Sunday. I don't know what you're talking about. She's always been there. And so I kind of wish, and then in each call after that, you have, the farmer or the insurance guy, and they're all calling in, reminding him that Wendy is dead or whatever. And so I kind of wish that it would have ended with the husband, because when you get these people calling in, you could say, oh, well, it's just a prank call. So the believability of the reality of which one is true was kind of thrown out the window at the very start. I kind of wish they left that conversation for the very end, because up to a certain point, even you as the viewer would be like, oh, okay, that might have been real. Maybe, or it might have been a prank. Like, yeah, some guy's calling in and they're saying she's passed away. And like, I kind of wish they revealed it more slowly. It would have been a lot more engaging that way, I feel. But anyway. But speaking on the story side, there is one big problem that I have to bring up that is frustrating. So, as you know, Saga, when she was first revealed for the first trailer as they were developing this game, Saga was cast as a Swedish actress because, the story at that time was all about Saga being a Swedish woman. And so I understand it was, some kind of DEI thing. They changed her to, a Black American woman for whatever reason. It's like, okay, because they wanted diversity. And it's like, fine, that's fine. I'll just ignore it. I'll try to ignore it that they changed it. And it becomes very difficult to just ignore this point, because it becomes the main focus of the second half of the game, that Saga is a ethnic Swede. And you're like, okay, like the entire second half of the game is about finding her home and her true family and her identity. And the whole thing is that she's related to Tor and Odin, who are the washed up Swedish drunk rock stars in their 60s who live in the trailer park. And it ties in the story that she moved back to Bright Falls with her daughter in the scratch version of the story where she drowned. And so then, and they have this whole thing where the finale of the game is the two rock stars, they use their rock star superpower to do the summoning to open up Cauldron Lake so that Saga can go to the dark place and help Alan. And so and says the only reason she can use this mind palace power is because of her family's history, and then she can telepathically communicate with her grandparents. Okay, well, and then it shows a section where it's well, her mother was Swedish, but she obviously isn't. And then what about her father? Well, again, it turns out her father left, and he was abusive and never in the picture to begin with. And so her mother, Freya, was left to raise her alone. And it ends up, again, with her daughter drowning. So if they just kept it as it was, and they just kept it, it would just be, okay, her dad's a deadbeat dad, but now he's also Black. And so that just kind of this is what we talk about when you have negative diversity, when you add something and it only speaks to a stereotype and makes everything way worse. So the entire time I'm playing this Saga, I didn't think about this at all until the second half of the game, where they make it the main point that of this whole story. And so, and you can just tell, it's just so painful that the story was written with a specific character in mind, and they just inserted this other character. And it's not just how she looks and how she sounds, her accent, everything. It just, because even the other characters, the two Swedish Viking rock stars and the other two new Finnish characters, Yulmo and Jorgen, they have very specific accents. They make, I'm not sure if they intend to, but they make a point. There's a Swedish accent, there's a Finnish accent, and of course there's Alan Wake, who's American. There's kind of important to know who is from where and what their identity is, and it ties into what they look like and how they act and how they sound like. And it's just very distracting. So I honestly just, what I hope happens is someone mods the game so you can play as the original actress that they cast for this script in this role, which makes way more sense than what is here. So that's the only thing. That being said, Saga with an unchanged script kind of sucks as a character. She's like really boring. Like regardless of what you do, she is not an interesting character. Like she'll like pet all the moose trophies. She'll be like, oh, you poor animal, and then she'll say like, I need to solve the case. Like she has no personality other than I need to save my daughter and solve the case. By golly. There's actually one interesting part at the end of the game which I really, really like, where she's trying to solve she's in the dark place, and for the first time she's being confronted with almost her shadow self. And so she starts blaming herself, and she's trapped in her mind palace when she goes to the dark place. And she's saying things like, oh, I let my partner get in trouble. I let down my husband. I let down my daughter. I let down my grandparents. I let down my parents as a detective. I'm just a worthless person. And so you have this cool mini game where you take this same evidence board, but it's all of these bad things that have happened, and you're building a case for why you're a terrible person. And it's such a cool psychological concept via the mechanics of the game. And of course, and as you add more evidence around the room in your mind palace, all the lights get dimmer and dimmer and darker until you start looking at evidence that is proof you're a good person. So like a birthday card from your daughter, your law degree that you got to become a detective or a police officer. You have all these elements of physical proof that, you know what, I'm actually not a bad person. And you start building a case to solve that you are a good person, you are a good detective, and you defeat that shadow version in your mind palace, and you bring the light back, and you wake up. It's like, okay, you know what, that was actually pretty cool. That was a very peak moment. And I would say that, again, the second half of this game feels better than the first half. The first half is very kind of, I don't know, a little bit not cheesy, but a little bit boring, like, okay, FBI, whatever. The second half is actually pretty good. Another thing that I would also kind of complain about that was fine but could have been so much better is the whole Champion of Darkness, Herald of Light moment, because like that was the big thing and everyone was talking about it. It was the main thing they showed at E3. I'm like, okay, cool, what is the context for this super intense moment? Because I was thinking Control had a really nice I don't know what you call it, segment where you have the music kick in, and it's near the end of the game. And again, it's kind of without context, but Ati gives you, the key to, the door, and you basically go inside this corridor, the endless corridor, and it's like a rock music video. And it's like, oh, this is like sick. This is really cool. I'm like, is this the climax of the game? It was like the sub climax, but it was really, really fun. So I was expecting context for this whole Herald of Darkness thing, and there's none. And I was so disappointed. It's just like whatever. It's like Rocky Horror Picture Show Time Warp. Like, what's the point of the time warp? That we're singing it. There is no point. We're not even going through time. It's just happening. And the thing is, within the same game, I see the potential where you could have put this. So in like the last level or the second last level, and for Alan Wake, you go to a movie theater, and in the movie theater you like uncover this whole plot of Zane to adapt. No, sorry, it wasn't Zane's film. Oh no, sorry, it was Zane's film that wasn't an adaptation of Alan's work, but like a film he made independently in Finland that was never released outside its borders. And so you're uncovering this whole world of Zane in the movie world, and there's a point where you go inside the movie world and find more clues and evidence and ideas and themes. And I'm like, that's where the Herald of Darkness segment should have been, because it's like you're going inside this music video or this video, or it should have been, the horde mode at the end where you play a saga and you have to shoot all these guys. You did have a music thing where they literally had to play the music by the band to summon, the dark waves to come up, and access the dark place. But like the Herald of Darkness moment should have been for Alan's level in when he goes into the film. Like, that makes so much more sense than just having it randomly be in the middle of the game for like no reason. So whatever. And I do like that segment where they have with Mr. Door and you're going through the movie studio and whatever, but man, I just like wasted, like misused potential. It could have been a lot better with added context rather than just whatever. I guess another thing I might also pick on this game is the writing. Yeah, the writing for a game about playing a writer. I don't mind certain dialogue by certain characters. Like, for me, it's swearing. It's fine when it's like the country bumpkins and like the people who are supposed to be the dumb country people. But when Alan starts swearing, it's kind of like, I'm pretty sure that wasn't in the original game that much. And the other thing too is that Alan is a writer. He's supposed to have a very complex vocabulary because that's his job. And I just didn't really feel that with his character. I felt like he was the same as almost everyone else, other than he's trying to defeat Scratch in the dark place and whatever. And yeah, I don't know. I just felt a little bit off, I guess. I will have to admit, though, in terms of story, there's actually a really, not a great, but there's a twist at the end that actually explains why everything was the way it was, which is essentially that the cult itself, that you have Yunmo and Jorgen, who are, again, the two Finnish guys, and I love, oh my god, I love the little skits they do where they have a bunch of commercials for like beer and coffee, and they're these intentionally low budget productions with their funny accents. I love those. Those are like the highlight of the game for me, to be honest, because you can show that to anyone and it's very funny. And yeah, there's just a lot of Finnish terminology in this game that you just come across, which is very interesting, like pants at home drunk, that kind of thing. And it turns out like they're the leaders of the cult, but they're not the cult that you're fighting. So it's like the cult that you're fighting are actually Scratch's version of the cult. And so you find out, oh, so Alan Wake, to write himself out of the dark place, has to fight with Scratch, his alter ego. And so Scratch is like, there's an evil cult. And so Alan's like, okay, there's an evil cult, but they're actually good guys. And so the cult you actually fight as Saga are actually Scratch's manifestations called the Taken. And so you're fighting these cult members, but they're actually Scratch's version of the cult that come out of the lake as these monsters, like in the first game. So where your ideas become reality. That's the whole premise of Alan Wake. That what if a writer's ideas became reality, but he's fighting against his alter ego. And so it makes sense that these two guys, these really funny, goofy guys, actually aren't evil, because they started the cult in order to scare away people from going to the woods, because that's where all the evil manifestations were coming from. And so they themselves are the ones actually fighting them with flashlights and all this other stuff. And the entire reason they had a ritual murder at the beginning of the game for that guy is because he appears at the beginning of the game from the lake, and you think he washed up on shore. No, he was actually a monster birthed from Cauldron Lake, and that's why they had to put like do all this stuff and use the clicker and the light and whatever, because that's what you do in the game. So it's like, okay, this actually makes sense now that all this time you were fighting apparitions rather than real people. I just love it. It was a great twist, and along with that, in terms of all the Finnish terminology, Ahti is another character who has a ton of that and a ton of expressions, and that's the other thing that I should have opened up with in this review, is that Alan Wake is kind of like a multiverses crossover where they incorporate a lot of aspects from their previous games. So you have things like the FBC from Control. You have, of course, the original stuff from Alan Wake 1, but you also have, Ahti from Control and characters from their other games. And although, because I think Rockstar technically has the rights, they couldn't get Max Payne, but for some reason they did have Sam Lake in this game, as you know, who was the writer and the face of Max Payne and Max Payne 1. And so he shows up as Casey, who is a detective who shares a name with Alan Wake's best-selling novels called The Casey Files, which is kind of like a cheesy little, term for this book series that is highly popular, kind of like a popular Pulp Fiction kind of thing. And so he actually appears as that character. And you know what, it's funny, he's not an actor, he's certainly not whatever, he's like a writer, but he's very funny. Well, he's not funny, but he does a sufficient job of like, okay, yeah, I believe this guy is a detective in this world. His voice acting is fine, his characterization and whatever acting is fine. He doesn't steal the show, but he's not distracting. He doesn't feel out of place in the world. He actually feels like he's part of the cast, which I think is really great and hard to pull off. And there's just something funny about his face. Like, he always looks like he's like making a funny expression or mewing or something. Just looking at Sam Lake's face, it's really funny. And again, I don't even know if that's his real name. I'm sure it's some very long Finnish name, if that's his writer's name. There's so much overlap on a story that's about writers creating a story, and then you have the actual writer of the actual game writing a story and a fictionalized version of himself. But no, the credits said Sam Lake, so it's probably him, or that's his pen name. I don't know. Anyway, all I know is that every time I see that guy, I always yell, "It's Pain." So, but yeah, Alan Wake 2, it's pretty good. It's decent. I think it's better than the first game for sure, but again, it's nothing super mind-blowing, and it was 25 hours, which felt a little bit long. It just kind of went on, and at a certain point I was kind of getting tired of playing it, to be honest. I just kind of like, can we wrap this up? And wrapping it up, like, I do appreciate this, where they have this section where they say, if you continue in Saga's story, this is the end game state, and you won't be able to manually save. I'm like, oh, thank you for directly telling me that. So this is your point to go back, find stuff, etc. And the only issue is that through that process, I thought, okay, cool, this is the final game. I got all my extra whatevers, and I went into it, and I thought, okay, how much longer could the final end game be? And so after 3 chapters, which some of them are short, some of them are long, out of like 12, I finally come to the end of the game, go back to the main menu, and it's like, when was your last save? It was 3 hours ago. So once you hit that end game state where it'll autosave, but you can't really put the game down, or it's implied you shouldn't put the game down. This is the final section. Usually that's like half an hour to an hour max, so it's 3 hours long, which is pretty ridiculous. It reminds me of Death Stranding ending. It's just very long, except in this game there's actual gameplay. You're not just watching a bunch of Kojima cutscenes. That being said, there are quite a lot of cutscenes in this game. And speaking of cutscenes, the Finnish film Joton, which they show in the movie theater once you finish the movie level, which is completely optional to watch, by the way, I was enthralled by that. And it reminds me that one of the reasons I actually got into Alan Wake was because of a short movie version of the game, of the first game. And so it's this kind of weird feeling where, yeah, these games are fine, they're good, but the short movie that they showed was actually really good. And it kind of makes me think that the people who make Alan Wake would almost be better as filmmakers than as a game medium, which is a really weird thing to say. But yeah, the short movie for Alan Wake 1 and even Joton, it's very artistic, it's interesting, it has that kind of time-lapse, it has a Lynchian feel to it, and it's pretty engaging. I watched it so long that my controller shut off. It was like only 20 minutes, but it was like someone came by. My brother sat down and watched with me. He's like, oh, what's this movie you're watching in a video game? It felt like VR chat. It's pretty decent. So yeah. So Alan Wake, it's a very interesting, cerebral kind of game. It's kind of like Silent Hill, but I think it fails and falls short a lot. Like, they kind of get to the point where, like, yeah, this is your shadow self, you should overcome it. But they don't get really into the guilt, the tragedy, the deeper emotions that you find in the Silent Hill games. So it's still of that ilk, but it doesn't really fully deliver. And also the scariest thing that happened to me in the game is that there was, like, during when your mental breakdown, there's an enemy that appears in your mind palace, and that was actually the one time I was legitimately scared, because I was no longer safe in my own mind, which was a pretty cool concept. But anyway, that's Alan Wake 2. It's pretty good. It has a lot of content, and I waffle on, if it insists upon itself too much, but it's fairly good. But anyway, that's Alan Wake 2. I'll see you guys later. Bye.